our social service system feel like they fall through the cracks of success. And I have found through the years that one of the components of that is when you grow up in survivor mode, you pretty much have to shut down your feelings. And you do what you can to protect yourself, and you do what you can to survive. But unfortunately, you gotta check back into your bodies if you're actually going to go ahead and have the kind of success that you envision in your head. But the challenge of checking back into the body is you purposely shut down the feelings in the first place because they were just too painful. So it's not an easy journey to check back into the body. So I'm gonna have everyone here just real quick raise your arms above the head for a moment. And just kind of breathe in and then bring your arms down. Recently I was reading somebody and they said that we rarely raise our arms above our head anymore. We don't generally do that. We don't reach up for things, and we don't hang, and we just don't have our arms above our heads very much. So it means that it keeps our breath and our chest compressed, and we're not opening up our bodies very much. When I grew up, being physically strong was extremely important to me. I was born in the 50s, so I grew up in the 60s. But the main person that taught me how to be in the body was my grandmother. And she worked all the time. She just always worked. She was always cooking and cleaning and gardening. But the cool thing about her was that she was really in her body, and as hard as her life was, which it was hard many times, she just had this joy of movement. And she was constantly moving and moving and moving and moving. So I followed that example, and I grew up really enjoying chores. I enjoyed working. I enjoyed tools. I liked tools. They were an extension of my body. I could use them. They had leverage. That's something that I have found with all the youth I've worked with, that it's not as common anymore. Kids don't grow up necessarily using tools. And when I first started bringing some of my boxers into the home to work with them on how to do chores, how to cook, how to clean, how to sweep even, they literally didn't know how to use tools. It wasn't in their bodies. There was just no memory. They just kind of, like that, you know. The other thing I really wanted as a kid was to be a writer. So I learned early on, I had a dream that I wanted to write motivational stories. I wanted to take people on journeys. Of course, at the time, I didn't realize I was really wanted to know my own story. Because at the time when I grew up, I didn't realize I was a survivor. I didn't know that. And then the third thing was, I had a lot of anger, a lot of emotion that would come out of me, and I didn't know what to do with it, and I didn't know who to talk to about it. So one day I found a pair of boxing gloves in the closet. They were from my father's army days. And I built myself a punching bag out of a burlap sack and some hay and hung it from a tree, and found that I could kind of manage the emotions a little bit that way. And that's where my long-term relationship with boxing began. But most of it was just at the time, it was just a way of accessing my emotions. Then when I moved into my young adulthood, I took those three elements with me, and lucky for me, if you like doing chores, you like working with tools, it's pretty easy to get a job. So I had access to getting a job. That was great. I continued to write. Writing was really important to me. I loved to read. I wrote. I listened to music. I watched movies. I just clearly wanted to express myself. But that part was always kind of tricky, because not only was the anger there, but then there was these kind of underlying despair that would emerge past the anger, and I never knew what to do with that. And once again, I didn't grow up as a person who talked to other people, so I didn't ever talk about it. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know what it meant. So when we grow up surviving,
If you can just
keep talking.
Yeah.
Okay, so we grew up surviving. Technically, one of the main elements of that is going to be that you feel abandoned. So if you grow up and you feel abandoned, if you grow up and you feel like nobody cares about you, if you grow up feeling like no one really understands what you're experiencing, well, it creates gaps in your development. And there's just pretty much no way that you can develop into a successful young adult if you feel bad about yourself. And feeling bad about yourself it's as that other talk was saying, it's shame. It's toxic shame. And once again, these things are stored in the body. But the idea is if we feel bad about ourselves, and we check out of our bodies, kind of like checking out of a hotel, and we check into our heads, and now we're in our heads. And our heads are thinking all sorts of things, and anticipating, and projecting, and fearful, and we're living in our heads. So once again, it's the idea is you gotta check back into your body. So I'm gonna do a real simple exercise with everybody. If everybody would put their feet on the floor. All action starts from the feet up. So we live in a force of gravity, so if you're gonna move, you have to push down through your feet first. So all movement is from the feet. Okay, I'm gonna have you all visualize that you have a Sharpie in your hand. And I'm going to have you visualize drawing an outline around the outside of your feet. Start with the left foot. We start at the big toe. Visualize drawing a line towards the pinky, down around the heel, and back up to the big toe. And we move to the right foot. And you start at the big toe. You draw your line toward the little toe, down around the heel, and back to the big toe. Now you have an outline of your feet on the floor. All right, so then I'm going to have you push down through the left foot so that you shift to your right. I'm going to have you push down through your right foot and shift to your left. And let's do it 5 more times. Push down and shift, push down and shift, push down and shift, and push down and shift. Okay, so that's one of the drills I use with people to check back into the body. You start with the feet because that's where all action starts in anyway. And as a person decides to move on from being a survivor to being a thriver, you got to check back into the body. It's a good way to start is to check in by doing a foot outline. At least now you can feel where your feet are. And that does help you know where you are. You're always where your feet are. So stories. Like everybody else, my story unfolded. I came to be a young adult, moved on from home. I dropped out of high school, so I moved out of the house pretty early. Decided that I really wanted to pursue a self-aware lifestyle. That's what I decided. And I decided I was going to use movement, and I was going to use story, and I was going to use theater. I didn't really know much else besides that, but I just knew that I really wanted to know more about who I was and what I was feeling, and I really wanted to help others do the same. So by the time I was 25, I started my first business. I had a house painting business, great business. Once again, like I said, I loved tools, I loved working, I was good at it. So that part was taken care of. Was writing, I was actually doing readings around town, so I kind of felt like, yeah, okay, this has happened, this is pretty cool. And by then I had a real punching bag, so I worked out a lot of my punching bag. I was learning how to box, so I was actually learning how to box, which is an incredible experience. It teaches you everything you want to know about how afraid you are, almost instantly. There's something about standing in the ring with someone and letting them hit you, and you hit them back. You learn a lot, and you learn very fast. And I was also working with, I had a couple of private clients. Actually, I'd already started doing some life coaching then, and working with them through the same formula I came up with. Exercise to feel strong and in the body, and then you use the punching bag to access your feelings. So I felt like, by the time I got to maybe 34, my life was pretty much, the foundation was there, it was all carved out. It was, okay, this is cool, let's start focusing on settling down and maybe get married. And then I started having terrible dreams. dreaming of long hallways with all these closed doors. And eventually, behind the doors, I found children who were crying or bleeding or dead. I knew how to follow dreams, to access the subconscious, so I followed these dreams, and they very quickly revealed to me that I had been used for sexual purposes pretty much my whole life by adult members. So you can imagine, I had no idea that this was behind me. I didn't know I had grown up this way. I didn't remember any of it. Pretty devastating. There was a little bit of relief because suddenly things made more sense to me. It's like I understood why I was struggling with suicidal thoughts. Like, what? Oh, no wonder. You know, this thing happened in my past and I didn't really know that. I also was really struggling with emotional outbursts. I had a temper, but it was worse than just a temper. It was like these emotions would come over me and I wouldn't know what to do with them, and it would take me weeks to recover from them. And of course, it never looked good either. So those things kind of made sense, but pretty much I felt like at that time my life was just everything dropped out. It was almost overnight. I couldn't bear to paint houses anymore. It was really strange, but I just felt like I was covering people's secrets up, and I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. So all of a sudden, my job was gone. My way of staying strong, my shoulders was gone. I couldn't write anymore because I just didn't have the strength to be vulnerable, and I just couldn't. I was so used to being hidden that I couldn't write about it, so that seemed to be gone. The only thing I had was my punching bag. So I took to my punching bag and basically set about reshaping my life. And it had to be a life that was based on what was inside and what I was feeling and what had been shut down. So another drill that I came up with through the years, once you check back into the body, that's great. But you have to take time to get used to being in the body when you spend so much time getting out of the body. So let's do another little drill. Everybody feels weighed down in life. Everybody, for one reason or another. But people who survive their kidhood often struggle with depression. And it's very, very real. And it can be almost impossible to come out of. So I decided, okay, well, as long as if I'm feeling depressed, then why don't I just feel what it feels like and let my body just be that instead of telling it, stop doing that, stop doing that. And then I go to the very bottom of it and just feel like that, and then I come to the top. And then I do it, and I come to the top. And I'm gonna do it, and I come to the top. And then after I do it about 6 times, all of a sudden it's like, wow, this feels kind of good, you know? And it was actually just putting the movement. So instead of being stuck on one end of the range, I put in movement so I was going back and forth. So let everybody just let your shoulders slump. Now some of you, this is going to feel more comfortable than others. Most of us know what it feels like to slump our shoulders. Then think of your spine compressing down, and then sit tall. And slump, compress, sit tall. And slump, compress, sit tall. And slump, compress, sit tall. So that would basically be a movement range. I learned a lot about range through boxing. Boxing is all about weight shift. You learn how to shift your weight, and it's all about range. When you want to flee, you hit about here, then you gotta come on back. You want to fight, you have to invite. You want to freeze, you have to move. It's pretty simple. You can't just stay on one end of the range. And then the third thing that I came up with is once you check back in the body, once you get a little bit more comfortable feeling the range of your emotions, so it's not just positive and negative, but it's actually a movement range, then you got to calm yourself down. Because of course anxiety is a huge, huge, huge part of learning how to be a survivor. So start real quick. You visualize a coffee pot in your head. And the coffee pot fills up with mental chatter. It's all that chaotic jumble that's in our heads. And you visualize emptying the pot into your chest. And the chest is where that pounding heart anxiety is. And then you let that pot fill up, and you empty it into your belly, and now it's just the nervous butterflies. And you let that pot fill up, and then you empty it into your pelvic bowl, and you put the lid on it, and you've got stored, usable energy. And I found that that has been really one of the most helpful drills I do, to just empty my mental chatter into my chest, into my belly, and then into the pelvic bowl. Now I have that, now I have energy that's ready to be used when I need it. So then, to just kind of wrap it up, I basically had to reshape my life after I had my huge, it was a breakdown. It was terrible. It took me 7 years to carve out a new foundation, and in the process I learned there were different kinds of tools. Not all the tools are physical tools. I learned these drills that I talked about. Had the great opportunity to work with a lot of people. I opened up my gym. I had a competitive team. So every day I got to deal with people who, most of them, were slipping through the cracks. Boxing's always been important in our society for that purpose. The people who would slip through the cracks of success oftentimes seek boxing as a way of finding themselves and finding their self-esteem. So through the years, I feel really lucky and really grateful to have worked with many people I have, to work with all the youth I've worked with. I also work with a lot of adults. And it's given me a really deep respect for those of us who feel like we came out of our kidhood as survivors and really want to turn our lives around to being thrivers. Thank you.